Hey everyone, welcome back to the Beat Your Genes podcast. This is episode number 333. Just a few announcements for the show. I learned from Dr. Lisle recently that Dr. Hawk has decided to take a hiatus from Beat Your Genes. We wish her all the best in all of her future work, and what I'll do is I'll post a link to her website somewhere here so that you can see what she's up to. So this means it's back to just Dr. Lisle and me. The second announcement is that I'm going to Freedom Fest in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. I had gotten a few messages from people about the NEEPS conference that I'd gone to, and if I knew of other conferences like it. Videos coming soon about the NEEPS conference. I know I'm still working on it. It's taken a lot longer than I expected, but I'm not going to be making a video about Freedom Fest. It's not an evolutionary psychology conference, even though Steven Pinker and others will be there, but it should have a bunch of very fun, informative talks. So if you do happen to go and you do happen to see me there, come and say hi. I always love meeting fans of the show. In today's episode, Dr. Lisle discusses the overlap of the big five personality traits in normal human behavior and how to understand that conceptual framework rather than getting bogged down in formulaic thinking. Our next question has to do with anti-anxiety medications and whether or not they are ever worth taking temporarily. And then we wrap things up with a question about being in a great marriage to a best friend, but whose romance is fading. Let's see what Dr. Lisle has to say. I'll see you in the video. All right, Dr. Lisle, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Absolutely. All is well. Things are good. I had a session just for folks that are curious. So I had a Living Wisdom Library with Jen Hawk yesterday. We had a good time. She's very busy, so she's taken a hiatus for Beat Your Genes for a while she gets her, all kinds of stuff together. So we hope to see her back when it fits for her. So, but for a while, it's just me and you again.
All right, sounds good. And we wish Dr. Hawk the best. If anybody's listening wants to follow along with her journey and kind of get in touch with her, I'm going to put the link right here for you to reach, for everybody to click on there and go to her website and check her out. So
all good, and she and I will be continuing to do the Living Wisdom Library, which is our little gizmo that we do. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Well, all's well. What's going on? Do we have a bunch of questions? How are things?
Yeah, we got some questions, and let me just pull them up here. And so we our first question is kind of a broad question, but I thought it would be interesting to start from the very beginning again, which is the question is about the big five and about personality and how this all works together. And it's as follows: Dear Dr. Lisle, the big five traits overlap way too much for me. For example, is someone nice because they are agreeable or because they are extremely conscientious and they believe it's the right way to behave? Or are they just intelligent enough to understand that being nice is an advantageous strategy to get people to cooperate with them? Is there any new developments in this field of personality? How do I think about all this?
Yeah. Boy, that is a big question. And it was a question that I went off on yesterday. So it feels like deja vu all over again, but this is today will come out a little bit different. So I want the person, when we think about personality, the big five plus IQ, i.e. what Jeffrey Miller calls the central six, but it's an idea that never caught on. What they are is they're super useful descriptions about what it is that you're observing in people. So they're useful descriptions. They are not, we're not actually measuring ingredients of 5 different things that we put into tomato sauce. So if we're trying to say, well, why is this tomato sauce, different than the other tomato sauce? It's like, well, there's 5 ingredients, after tomatoes, then we've got basil and marjoram, or I don't even know anything else. Okay.
Tomatoes is the most important.
Now I'm in trouble already. Okay. Yeah. But the point is that if we're making tomato sauces, we might have 5 ingredients and we might put those in different amounts and different combinations. And you can actually imagine if let's suppose we had, 4 different levels of those ingredients that we would use, a quarter, a half, 3/4, and full, that with 5 ingredients, there would be an amazing amount of permutations. I don't even know what that is. I don't know if that's 4 to the 5th or 5 to the 4th, but whatever the hell it is, it's an awful lot of combinations that are involved there. And that's actually oversimplifying it, because we wouldn't have had to hack it into a quarter of a teaspoon, a full, 3/4 of a teaspoon. No, we could have done it in tenths of a teaspoon. What then? Okay, then we got 10 different amounts of each of those 5 spices, and then we've got every single combination that's involved there. Now we're talking about a fantastical number. I don't know, it's probably 100,000 different combinations. So and that isn't even the truth. So when you talk about personality, it's not like, oh, well, you got, 80th percentile of conscientiousness. You didn't get anything of the kind. What you actually have is 25,000 genes, of which probably half of those genes are involved in building the brain. And those genes do not work in a simplistic fashion that would have been very neat and orderly for science. Would have been very neat and orderly for science that says, oh, well, you have this gene, and therefore that gene means that you've got blue eyes, and then you've got this gene, which means you have long fingers, and then you have this gene, which means that you've got high IQ. Not even remotely. These genes work together in concert with each other. So gene 1772 works with gene 668, which works with gene 14, which works with gene 7492, which only works with gene 8267 on the times when gene 347 happens to be X. It's like, forget about it. It is unbelievable. What we're looking at the big 5 or the central 6 are generalities, real general. Okay, it's not bad. It's like a blind person that can see things moving and can actually see them in color. It's like, okay, you can actually see some shapes. You kind of know what the color is, and you kind of know how big it is, and therefore, and you can see it moving, so you can kind of tell how close or far away it is. That's it. Okay, so an example I used, I happened to have a relatively long conversation with a person that was concerned about the meaning of their IQ score. And it's a really good question that they had, and they were puzzled by something. And I could go on for an hour to try to exhort people into understanding what I understand about IQ. And I'm going to do it now for a few minutes, because I think it's helpful as we set that next to 5 other big descriptors that we use for humans called the Big 5. So if we look at intelligence, and we took, I learned a lot about this in grad school, and since that time I learned a lot more. But in grad school, we, as a psychologist, you learn to give IQ tests. And so I had to learn to give the 3 major IQ tests that existed at that time. There's probably 1 or 2 more. There might only be the same 3. There was the Weiss or the Wechsler scales. There was the Woodcock-Johnson, and there was the Stanford-Binet, which was the granddaddy of them all. And so it's going to turn out that I learned that when you took, for example, the Wechsler test, the test-retest reliability for an individual after 6 months, for example, was about 0.97, which is unbelievable. It was almost like measuring your height. It's so accurate. So you can imagine how proud of themselves that IQ tester people would be, given the fact that if you test-retest reliability, on an IQ test is 0.97, that's like, well, that means that you can't tell me that the tests are sloppy or they're not measuring anything. They're sure as hell measuring something, and they're measuring it super accurately. That's true. They are measuring something. What are they measuring? Well, we think we're measuring intelligence. Okay, let's just hold up for a second. the actual purpose of the IQ test was to predict how well people would do in school. That's the point to it. And so that's a useful thing to be able to do. Therefore, you can say, okay, those kids should be in that class, those kids should be in that class, and these kids should be in this class, because we've got a test that can tell us how likely they're going to do at different levels of complexity. That makes completely unreasonable sense. We can tell there's significant differences in intelligence in people. We can tell there's significant differences in beauty in people. We can tell that there's significantly differences in athleticism in people. And we can tell that there are significant differences in artistic ability in people. And we can tell that there are significant differences in social competence in people. In other words, there's a hell of a lot of variation in human beings. And so it's no surprise that we can tell we have a thing called intelligence. Okay. All right. So it's going to turn out that if you do this Wechsler test that has a 0.97 retest correlation coefficient, then it's made up of like 11 little subtests. So one of them is, oh, I'm going to read you a bunch of numbers, and then you're going to see if you can read them back. Or I'm going to give you a bunch of numbers, and I'm going to see if you can say them backwards. Okay, that's interesting. That's one of the 10 tests or 11 tests. Like, wow, that's one of 11 tests of this thing that we call intelligence. Seems like that's given a hell of a lot of credence to something that seems pretty simplistic. But hey, it turns out it correlates halfway pretty well with how well people do in school. So we're going to use that. Okay, now we're going to do something else. We're going to put some blocks that are made of red and white on a table and make patterns with it, or show you a picture of it. And you're supposed to take these blocks and make the pattern as fast as you can. Okay, that's pretty good. Oh, that's another 1/10 of the Wechsler test. You're like, well, we think that that's measuring, geometric. Well, no doubt that it is. Okay, but here's the problem. That the people over at Woodcock-Johnson or over at Stanford-Binet, they have very similar subtests. So now maybe they use 3 numbers and have you go backwards, or they use single digits or double digits. They slightly vary it. Okay, very small variances, very similar things that they're measuring. And guess what? They have retest reliabilities that are 0.97 as well. The only problem is that those 2 tests only correlate 0.7. That's not even close. Okay, so now it's like, uh-oh, I got a 135 on the Wechsler, but I got a 125 on the Stanford-Binet. And I got a 128 on the Woodcock-Johnson. What's my IQ? Okay, and you're like, well, they all sound pretty high. Yeah, well, one of them's at the 99th percentile and one of them's at the 92nd percentile. Hey, that's a pretty freaking big difference. So what is it? Is this person an 80th percentile brain, or are they a 70th percentile brain? Well, it depends on which test they took. So nobody would ever find the tests correlating at 0.7. It would tell you that if somebody scored at the 80th percentile on one test, they are very likely to score between the 65th and the 95th percentile on the other test. Okay, that's a hell of a lot better than nothing. In other words, it's clearly, if they score 80th percentile on a test, they're not going to score 40th percentile on the other test. But it's sure, like, what's the answer? What is the person's IQ? The answer is the person has no IQ. If I manufacture 1,000 different intelligence tests, that person is going to have 1,000 different answers to them. Or is it going to put them in a general quadrant? Of course it is. Okay, so that's all you can say. You can say that person is very bright, i.e., they scored in the top 2 or 3 percentile of an intelligence test. Okay, that person is pretty bright. What does that mean? They scored between 70th and 90th percentile. That person is really quite bright. They're not super bright, but they're quite bright. They scored 92nd percentile on an intelligence test. Okay, that person seems to be average. Okay, they scored somewhere between 30th and 70th percentile on an intelligence test. The point is that if they quote scored average on one of them, i.e. 40th percentile, it's very likely that they would score 60 on another one. Okay. And so now when they score 60 on another one, I don't really know what I have. Do I have somebody that is more likely to be somebody that would score 40 on another one? Or have I got somebody that could score 75 on another one? I don't even know. I've got one snapshot. Well, it's extremely reliable. That's reliable on that specific test, but it doesn't tell me where the hell they're going to do on the other tests. Okay. So that's why all we're doing with intelligence testing is we have a vague notion that's useful about describing something. We did not get a percentile level of intelligence injected into that human being's brain, and that determines who it is that they are and tells us all kinds of things about them. That is not what happened. Okay. What we have, instead of a singular thing called intelligence, we have a million interactions between 12,000 genes, building circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit by circuit. And you have an immensely complicated organ that has inside of it different ways that it figures out how to solve problems, different ways it evaluates things, different cost-benefit algorithms, slightly altered from person to person. So inside one of the characteristics we're going to see is, oh, that person can really remember a bunch of numbers really well. Yeah, that's true. I wonder what that means about their ability to paint the Sistine Chapel. Probably not much. Okay. How about drawing a quick diagram about an out-of-bounds play at an NBA game? Probably not going to tell you too much about that. Okay. So what we have to understand is that intelligence is a word that we use, and it's extremely easy for people to actually see this in a highly vertical, singular dominance hierarchy, because human beings are designed by nature to think in categories and hierarchies. Okay, they're not designed to think in continua. Continua are too complex to be thinking about. So we don't say that man appears to be 6'1 3/4 inches tall. We say he's tall. He's pretty tall. Okay, i.e., if a guy is 6'8", we say he's really tall. Okay, we don't say, oh, he's 6'8". In other words, we're not using continuous variables. We're using categories. That's how human beings can communicate with each other. The brain has to, by the very nature of its information processing constraints, think in categorical processes. Okay. It can learn to think in continua. It will never be native to it. It's always going to be thinking in categories. And so when people start thinking about IQs, think about, what is it, 126? Oh, thank God, mine's 126. It's higher than yours. You scored 124. Okay, so this is where this goes. And then if we start talking about, oh, well, let's talk about something else, massively less objective than whether or not you can read numbers back that were read to you in 8 seconds. We're going to do something called, well, how outgoing do you seem to be? Holy smokes. This is, you can imagine how unreliable these tests are relative to each other. So if two tests using extremely similar subtests on an IQ test that are actually, and that they're measuring those things with an unbelievable small amount of error. In other words, by God, they're counting how many nose hairs you've got. Okay, they've got it under a damn microscope. You got 13,472 nose hairs, and when we come back 6 months from now, you're going to have 13,477. In other words, it's going to be pretty damn close. Okay, so we really are counting, this particular thing very narrowly and carefully. And when we do that, it turns out when we make a very slight permutation about how we do it, oh shit, it falls apart. It goes down to a 0.7 correlation coefficient. Wow. This shows you how particular these brains are put together. Okay. It isn't that it's all an amorphous, swashing, swamp. No, it is you. You are very precise. This is your personality. These are your intellectual capabilities, but they are incredibly narrow and minutely they're minutely put together. So you may be really good at putting things in I don't know, alphabetical order in English, but it turns out that you are worse than your friend who you're 10 percentile better than him at doing it in English. You're 10% worse in Russian, and both of you are bilingual. We change it just that much and we can see that it's not stable. Okay, why? Because there's very particular differences between those two languages, and therefore it turns out that the way his brain works and the way your brains work are a little bit different. Okay, now, so I'm going to go further on this. What the hell? It's our show. So people jumping up and down, which they will, out of simplicity and trying to solve the problem and try to find ways to think clearly. There'll be people that have thrown up their hands and say, screw it. It's just, we're going to call it G. It's just, that's it. You're just so intelligent and you're less or more, and that's it. It's like, no, you've actually lost the understanding of what you're looking at. What you're looking at is the same thing as beauty or the same thing as athleticism. How are you going to give somebody an AQ, an athleticism quotient? How are we going to do that? Well, they do that every year at the NFL Combine, and guess what? They don't use the same things they do in the NBA. We're trying to measure athleticism here. We don't use the same things? It's like, no, we don't use the same things. Why? Oh, we've got different problems that we're trying to solve. Oh, but it's clearly both athleticism, isn't it? It is, but you could take, quote, the greatest athlete in the world. And the greatest athlete in the world is defined by the man who wins the decathlon. Why? Because we measured it 10 different ways. We had you do an endurance thing. We had you do the high jump. We had you do the pole vault. We had you do the shot put. We had you do all kinds of different things, and we aggregated that. And we know that some of you are better than others, but at the end, we have a point system. And then at the point system, this is weighted this much, this has this many points, and therefore, then we declare the winner. Well, how useless is that? Do you want him on your NFL team? No. Do you want him on your Major League Baseball team? No. Do you want him on your NBA basketball team? No. Do you want him on your hockey team? No. Well, where the hell? What are we going to do with him? See, useless. Can't play soccer either. Okay. That's what the problem is. You can give him the top score in the world with an AQ, but what good does it do you? It's interesting. It means that he won the decathlon. Well, what if we have him compete instead in the pentathlon instead? Oh, well, it turns out he doesn't do that well in the pentathlon. He's 25th in the world. Oh, still a hell of an athlete. Pretty similar measurements. No, he can't win the pentathlon. Oh, I see. Good. So that's the problem with IQ. That you can give a score to somebody's athleticism. They try to in the NFL Combine, and there'll be somebody that will have the best combine score. And guess what? That guy's not going to be the first person drafted. He's not going to be the second person drafted. He probably won't be the 15th person drafted. Somebody's going to look at that guy. They're going to be trying to figure out, what do we do with those abilities on that guy? Where can we put him? That seems like a hell of a lot of athleticism to go to waste. I just don't know where the hell I'd play him. Why? Because he's not stellar at the one thing that I need at that position. He's a decathlon champion. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. Do you need him to throw the pole vault? Do you want him to be your quarterback? No, he's not that good at that. He's good, but he's not that good. Okay. How about, do you want him to sprint for you? 100-meter dash? That's in the decathlon. You want to make him wide receiver out of him? No, can't do that. He's not fast enough to be a wide receiver. Oh, shit. He's big and strong. He pushed a lot of weight. You're going to make him your linebacker because he's pretty fat? No, he's not quite big enough to be a linebacker. Oh, well, where the hell are we going to put him? Answer, there isn't a place for him. Okay. Start realizing, oh, AQ doesn't really, it's an interesting overall description of that individual is what it is. That's what a high IQ is. It's an overall description of an individual. It tells you something that's useful. But how much does it tell you? It sure as hell doesn't tell you that, oh, that guy's 145 IQ, that guy's 135 IQ. Trust 145 IQ. He knows. No, he doesn't. What problem are you trying to solve? What is it that we're trying to think through? Careful. I gave the example. Albert Einstein was Albert Einstein, for God's sakes. He's Albert Einstein. So doesn't that make him the genius that knows everything? Absolutely not. The guy was totally a socialist. He had no idea how economics worked. And he was all proud of himself, saying that everybody ought to speak up and give their 2 bits. Wow, did you not know anything? Ignorance and arrogance in the same place right there. Okay, so are we interested in his opinion? No, we're actually not interested in his opinion. Very clearly, if you're Ludwig von Mises, the center intellectual of Austrian neoclassical economics, if you're that guy, you listen to Einstein popping off, you're like, God, guy doesn't know anything. That's tragically mistaken. I hope you don't build a country around what that guy's saying. Okay. Could von Mises do theoretical astrophysics? Of course not. Why? One of them's a wide receiver, the other one's a quarterback. Completely different people, completely different minds. Could Einstein have learned that? Maybe, probably, maybe not. I don't know. Smart enough. Could von Mises have come up with relativity? Absolutely not. Impossible. Okay, so, but anyway, the point of this all is that that's that issue. The most objectifiable thing that you can measure the most reliably. When you start moving into personality, you're not going to measure it worth a damn. Okay, it gets incredibly subjective. What do you mean outgoing? What do you mean sociable? It's like, okay, we can have very general descriptions of a pattern that we see across a million neural circuits in an individual. Okay, so that's all you got there. So, and they are what they are. They're not changing. They're absolutely wired in there in utero. And this is the human, and this is who it is that they are. So anybody's like, yes, but I need to get my score up on this thing because it would be good for me to have a higher score. You're not. This is you. And the score is the score anyway. You want a higher score, take a different personality test. It'll come back a higher score. Take 3 of them. Trust me, one of them you're going to score higher. You're going to be happy then? What the hell are we talking about? Your personality.
Might as well have somebody else take the test for you too at that point.
Yeah. So the point of this all is this person's also saying, gee, these things seem to overlap. Well, neural circuits are neural circuits. And so we're trying, again, to say, gee, the ingredients aren't working quite the way we thought. I thought that we injected 6 ingredients into the person's head at different proportions, and that would tell us what it is that they do. Not even remotely close. That is a fantastically bastardization and incredibly overly simplistic view of what it is that you're looking at. You're looking at the most complex thing that has ever been built. Okay, you are looking at something that we can basically say, okay, there are patterns to how this works, and we have no doubt that there are reasons for those patterns. So there's going to be what sits under this, what I don't think neuroscience doesn't talk about this because they don't know, because they're not educated in EP. But what sits under the patterns that you see is going to be what the brain's primary function is to calculate value. Okay, that's its primary function. Its job is to evaluate the environment. And in order to calculate value, it has to estimate what its personal particular circumstances are relative to the environment that it finds itself in. And so it has, sense organs that help to try to discern what the facts of reality are with respect to the environment. And those sense organs aren't always agreeing with each other. In other words, so the system is attempting to triangulate on the truth. Everybody's heard something and then they looked at something, they couldn't see anything, and they're like, God, I know I heard something. Something had to have moved. I just can't see what the hell it could have possibly been. Okay. So your brain is attempting to try to figure out the facts of reality. And it also has nerves inside itself. So it has essentially data about the state of the organism itself. And it is attempting to calculate the resources and threats that are in the environment, and to judge all known and suspected and hypothesized resources and threats, whether they are in the sensory data bank right now or they are not, or if they're only in memory. Okay. And so that's what it's trying to do. You can imagine how complicated that machine is. You can imagine how two eyes, literally both designed for exactly the same problem, but they do not see things exactly the same. Okay. In other words, two eyes, both of them, even 20/20 vision, we're going to find out, oh no, they're not exactly the same. If we start moving things around, we start seeing which eye looks at the blue a little longer and the other one's looking at the brown a little bit longer in an array, we're going to find out that, oh, deep in the neural circuitry of actually even the choices that the brain makes about where it contracts muscles to move its eyeballs in order to get data, there's going to be individual differences about what colors and patterns are most attractive. Interesting. Okay. It's going to be infinitely complex. So, of course, when we do something as ham-handed, as medieval, as saying, hey, there's the thing we call the Big Five. It's medieval. Okay. 1,000 years from now, they will have fractionated these differences into 17,000 little things. Okay. Even then, it will be overly simplified. Right. So, is it useful? It's useful as hell. Okay. Do we even see the evidence of the calculation of value leaking its way through the individual differences in personality? You're damn right we do. Okay. You look at it in conscientiousness. You've got people that are saying, nah, I'm not going to worry about it. Higher risk tolerance, less worried, not going to put out the energy to reduce risk tolerance in that level. Somebody else super high conscientious, they're going to expend the energy. These are just energy conservation permutations built into different gambling machines. Okay, that's all it is. And so it's going to be that way with social threats. It's going to be that way with environmental threats. It's going to be that way with respect to environmental targets and opportunities. All of it. It's going to be in triage processes about what I think is the most important thing. And all of it is going to, what's simmering underneath of it, all of the person's behavior is also going to be their own personal individual history, as well as their personal individual circumstances at the moment. Okay. And we're going to be looking at other people, and they're going to be making decisions that a lot of times we do understand, we completely empathize with, and other times we don't at all. Sometimes we feel angry they're being unfair. Sometimes we're just flat out puzzled. But in no way are we going to be able to say, that's evidence that they're 76th percentile extroverted and 24th percentile conscientious, and that's why we wound up with that. Okay. Are those things still useful? Yeah, because they're clearly mapping individual differences in the way the genes built neurotransmitter availability and sensitivity in individual neural circuits that are computing value systems, of course. Okay. Will we ever discover those? Yeah, not really, not in this lifetime. We may discover a few little things. So they've discovered that, people that, I don't know, there's probably 50 little things that they found that are moderately entertaining. So people that are willing to gamble more, have a little more dopamine with respect to something that's it's a near miss. Okay. So they look at that and they say, okay, well, that's interesting. That's a potential fatal flaw that makes somebody a gambling addict. Okay. Except that that's exactly the quote fatal flaw that you see in Thomas Edison, who's willing to continue to persevere as he's trying to find the answer to how to make a light bulb. Okay. Getting a little closer, not quite. 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 Okay, the reasonable nervous system says, screw it. We tried 27 things. it's probably can't happen. Somebody else says, no, I'm going to keep going until I find it. That's a gambler. That gambler is putting time and energy into something that looks to a normal nervous system like it's a total waste of time. Okay. So that is not a flaw of that organism. That is not a disease. That's not a disorder. That's a feature. That's a feature of that organism. Okay. So at any rate, that's my rant on that. That took a bunch of time, but it's a great question. It's a hell of a question, but in order to do it justice, we have to roll out a very wide camera and look at an appreciation for what we do have, which is some general descriptions which are interesting, and what we don't have, which is anything that even remotely is a formula for understanding what you're looking at. Okay.
Dr. Lisle, that's great. It's a really, I love the broad view, and it reminds me of engineering. When we used to design control systems, you can have, like with the genes, it's basically your body is simply a number of control systems that are all controlled by, multiple other control systems at the same time. And so, when we used to design circuits, it's like, okay, you put an input, something happens in the box, and then if you control it with voltage, now this happens. Then you can have, in 4 or 5 different control systems, you can have thousands and hundreds of thousands different variations in the outcome. And so physiologically, when you're saying the genes are the ones they're doing this, what they're actually doing, right? They're controlling proteins to, turn some enzyme on or this. So it's not as big of a description as the personality. It's which genes are putting the lysosomes to increase productivity, which ones activate certain pathways. It's so much more detailed than kind of the broad language that we use. And it almost seems like there's a mismatch between the scientific method to study these things and then the language that we use when we actually live in reality and describe these things.
Absolutely. It's massively different levels. We have causality down here at the micro level that's extraordinarily complex. And then we have this description of something. It's like listening to, a third grade teacher trying to describe the theory of relativity.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, actually, you got it half-ass right. Use some of the little explanations that you heard on some science channel, and you're actually saying the words right, and the kids are like giggling, like, oh, so that means that time is, goes, can go faster or slower, depends upon how fast I'm moving. It's like,
turn on a light when I'm in the car. Yeah, is the flashlight now traveling faster?
Right, but the truth is that the complexity of what you're actually trying to describe and understand is vastly more complex. And so it's beautiful that you just described that, as you say, even with a few things in an engineering system with some variables like voltage that could go from 0 to 110 or whatever it is. It's like, oh, wow. And even then we realize, oh, it's actually a continuous variable in principle. It doesn't have to be. Depends upon what our systems are in there. We could make it discrete and make it 1 volt at a time, but we could also make it continuous, which makes it infinite.
Right.
Infinitely complex with an infinite amount of possible outcomes.
And you can put current controlled too. So it doesn't just control by voltage, it gets controlled by current too. Yeah.
Whatever the hell that is. I don't even know what that is. But the point of it all is that, and then in principle, and something in there, the temperature in the room would make a difference. Okay. Yep. And then maybe we want to have a little breeze in here, or we have an electromagnet or a magnet,
and that's the human body.
Iron filings in the room, or there's no end to this. Okay. And so then we start realizing, and what is the purpose of the brain? To make decisions to acquire or protect values, i.e. resources. That's what it is. It's a resource acquisition and defense machine. That is what it is. Okay. And so it has a fantastical ability to understand the state of its own organism. It has a fantastical ability to discern the facts of reality that it needs to know from its environment. So there's all kinds of molecules floating around that you can't see, but they're not big enough and they're not important enough for it to matter. So you can't see them, and you can't smell them, and you can't feel them, and you can't touch them. They're dead to you. They mean nothing. Okay. But the truth of the matter is they're there, but they're not relevant to gene survival and reproductive resource acquisition decisions. So therefore, we don't have any sense organs for them. Okay, there's all kinds of energy that's passing through your body right now that originated from the Big Bang that you can't feel, can't touch, can't smell, makes no difference to you, i.e., because you were engineered for resource acquisition and defense problems on this planet at this time. Okay, this is under these conditions of physics. That's what you're designed for. And your personality is just the permutations of the designs of organisms, that the way that evolution had to work is that it had to work, in order for this to work, it has to have little variations. Okay, so it's got little variations in the gene pool, and it's going to turn out that each of us is a little variation in the gene pool on our, it's interesting when you really think about it. There is no two people on this earth right now that are exactly the same height. That does not, there are not two people. So, oh yes, they are. They're both 5'9" and 16 1,000th of an inch. It's like, well, you didn't measure it carefully enough, because the truth is they are not the same. Okay, so the every single one of us is slightly different, including a pair of identical twins that had exactly the same design structure, but were under incredibly subtly different locations with respect to where they were in the womb. And therefore, they are not having exactly the same experience, and therefore there's a little bit of differentiation in how those neural circuits are built. So, yeah, I'm not frustrated by the fact that we talk this way. It's useful to talk this way. It's useful to talk because we can see then in very interesting, as this questioner pointed out, gee, I'm frustrated because is someone being just nice, or are they being highly conscientious? And the answer is, well, they are having a resource acquisition and defense problem. They are solving that problem as best they can. The fact is they could have different motivations. One of those motivations could be that they really sincerely like you and they want you to like them, and therefore they want to be your friend, and they are a really nice person and they're agreeable to what could have been normally a conflict of interest. Okay, or it could be that they are in fact not that agreeable. They think that you're being unreasonable, but they consider you to have possible future resource important decision making, and therefore they are acting more agreeable than they are. True. So we could arrive at basically an identical behavioral strategy from two different resource acquisition and defense strategies. We could arrive at exactly the same behavior. That's not a surprise. That's not a weakness of the Big Five description. That's just a realization that resource acquisition and defense problems have multiple ways that those resources could have been obtained. It could be, when we have little sayings, fortune favors the brave, or whatever. Fortune favors the bold. Well, so does death. All right, enough for now. Let's go on to something else just for fun.
Yeah.
See what else we.
All right, let's get the next question here. Here is all right. So here's another one on personality, but this is actually about anxiety medications. So it might, we can go as long as we need to, but here's the question. Dear Dr. Lisle, are there any situations or personality types where you believe that taking anti-anxiety medications would be a good choice versus just seeing a good anxiety therapist like Dr. Laura Bruce, who maybe won't be covered by a therapist like this may not be covered by insurance? So for example, I'm high in neuroticism, high in conscientiousness, but also very impulsive. And I'm currently working a very high pressure job to pay off a low interest loan. But the job is very stressful. Just for context, I came into it and then discovered they were operating at almost a $200,000 deficit. I'm being transparent with the board, but we are still operating at a big deficit, and we might need to even close the business within a year or two. My friend keeps telling me just to get on some anti-anxiety meds. And in this case, if I need to do something like work a stressful job for a year and then take anti-anxiety meds, would that still be off the table? Why or why not?
Okay. By the way, I think it's a terrible idea. So I'll wreck the suspense from anything else that I would say. I would never medicate my brain to get through anything other than a Roman invasion. Okay. So if the Romans are invading your fort and they're all on Benzedrine and they're going to stay up late, then by God, we're going to have to fight fire with fire, and we're going to have to do it too. Okay. So there would be extraordinary circumstances where we would drug the brain short term for a life or death performance. Okay. That would never happen over the course of the year. It would never happen over the course of a month, for God's sakes. So that concept that we would do that is out of its mind. Now, so what we need to do instead is we need to back up and we need to actually analyze the person's entire life context. We need to get inside their head, inside their personality, and understand what they believe their state of their organism is relative to their environment. We need to, as much as we can, understand what the adapted mind is calculating in terms of cost-benefit analysis on the resource acquisition problems that they're facing. Okay. I know 3 therapists that I would trust to be useful to try to help walk you through that. Jen Hawk, me, and Laura Bruce. Okay. I don't know a 4th one. Not that there aren't good people out there in the world. I just don't know any of them. Okay, so I don't want to be dismissive. There would be other people that would be reasonably wise. This is not an EP necessary type of a thing to understand this. Although it doesn't hurt to understand that at the base of this whole thing is that you are a gambling machine that is looking at resource acquisition and defense. And the one thing that I would never do is that I would never risk damaging my brain in order to try to acquire a resource. That brain is precious. You have one life to live, and that is where it's going to be lived. It's going to be lived inside those neural circuits. That is your life. Okay. And so taking some kind of medication, which is absolutely will disrupt that neural function. Okay. Possibly permanently. So there's not a chance in hell I would do that. So anti-medication, if I've got some little old lady that's grieving and can't get to sleep for 2 nights because her dog is dying or just died, and some psychiatrist says, gee, Doug, don't you think an Ativan would be a good idea for just 1 night? I would say, I can't argue with that. Short-term use for an anti-anxiety medication under unusually trying circumstances, a few times in a person's life, I can completely understand that. Okay. For a year to try to squeeze some money out of my own performance to try to accomplish something financially, not a chance in frickin' hell. Okay. So that's the ultimate answer there. The ultimate logic is don't be beating this thing up. This thing is precious. Okay. This brain of yours is precious. Its design is precious. And your friend is thinking, no, you've got a flaw. You've got too much anxiety. We need to dampen this down by balancing your, giving it a chemical imbalance out, back to your brain. So this is just helpful. It's medication. It's just like insulin for diabetes or vitamin C for scurvy. That's what it is. It's fine. No, it's not anything remotely like that. You're taking cocaine to stay up all night because you think you're in a creative bonanza and you're going to come up with Lisle. Okay. No, that is not, those people are going to do what they're going to do. And I'm not going to stop them from doing that. And they're going to think that's the reason they came up with Lisle. Okay. But the bottom line is that no, you got a company to run and you got a life to live, and you run it the best you can within the constraints that you have. If you're really, really anxious about something, talk to a Laura Bruce about why, what's driving that anxiety, what's the root of it, and what steps can we do to thoughtfully position our lives in a situation where we're feeling less threatened. Okay. Laura would do that. Jen would do that. I would do that. And I don't have a favorite. There depends upon what the nature of your problem is. We all would be capable of taking a shot at that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And to your point earlier about to make some money out of a year, from reading Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, the data suggests that people actually make less money over their entire life as they take these medications, and they end up being on Social Security disability, vastly more often over the course of, the last 40, 50 years that's been seeing that.
I actually completely forgot about that argument at a point. So good for you, little financial chip inside that head that filed that away. That actually, for people that don't know, the literally what that book is named for is the epidemic of disability in the United States. That's what it's named for. And he's saying the anatomy of the epidemic is the damage done by psychiatric medication. Yeah, fantastic. I forget that. I'm completely, I lost that thread in my head, but that's exactly right. Yeah. All right, let's take something else.
All right. Okay. So our here's another question. This is about marriage, actually. So, dear Dr. Lisle, what does a position of power with respect to marriage look like? For me, the biggest threat to leaving a marriage is loneliness. I'm not a super outgoing guy, and I fear that growing old without her companionship will be very depressing. My wife is my best friend, and the few friends I do have are the couple friends that we both share. My issue is that the sexual romance side of things is fading. We both have decent paying jobs, so financially we could comfortably figure it out if we did decide on splitting. I'm also not worried about the one child that we have together. We're both on the same page that our job is just to give him a good life experience. The main issue is we are best friends, and I understand that is partly because our lives are literally interdependent, but separating may sever that bond. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a super complicated, highly individual kind of a question. A lot of people are in circumstances like that. And it depends upon, sort of how old you are, what time of life it is that you're looking at. Sounds like they're reasonably young. If they're talking about a child, they're not talking about a 30-year-old adult that they share. So these are people that are probably not 60. This may be somebody that's 47 and they've got a 14-year-old. And so and nobody can tell you what to do or give you the best prescription for optimizing your life experience under that kind of uncertainty. All we can do when we don't know is we can run little experiments. Those are things that we can do when we are faced with a problem that we cannot see the solution to. I liken it to, I had a math professor once that when he put a big problem on the board, and he knew, he could tell by the nature of the problem, and probably because he'd been doing it for 30 years, that he knew that we were instantly intimidated. And he'd do that, and he'd say, okay, what do you do first? And he goes, you do something. Okay, you do something to simplify this problem, even if you can't see why that would be helpful, because you can already know that you're not going to be able to solve it with that one step, but you do it anyway. Okay, and you change the form of what it is that you're saying. So it might not even be simplifying. You just add two things to both sides of the equation, and this changes. It makes this more complicated, but it makes that side simpler. You keep changing it around. You're effectively running experiments on your brain's ability to see patterns. That's what you're doing. When there's a mathematical equation and it's a problem, what you're watching for, your brain, your unconscious, your adapted mind is searching in its memory, looking for patterns. And it's trying to recognize a pattern that has in fact been identified as a mathematical truth. And so when you will then have that moment where suddenly you'll see, you're like, oh, that's what it is. Okay. Well, what happened? Your adapted mind discovered the pattern that it already had filed away in its memory. It's possible that it had to do it creatively. It actually had to put two elements together that it had never seen before together, but it saw, because of the nature of the way those two things would interact, that in fact is the solution to that problem. Okay. So what do? We simplify the problem so that we can see. And so So there are a number of things that we would do. So if we could do things like have our own space temporarily. We could take independent vacations for the next year and take time off and spend a few days away. You could actually have a few of them that might be longer to see. And after a week or two, for example, you're trying to test what the price of the loneliness would be, trying to get a feel for it. Okay. You might actually even do something where one person takes a very significant trip. So they might even take a 2-month trip and hike the Appalachian Trail. Okay. If they wanted to do such a thing, do something in their life significant like that or longer. And then they would see that they would get away from that feeling that comes about being disconnected and then worried about that, etc. Essentially a kind of a separation anxiety. And then we might get past that. And then after you get past it and you go through facing the worst case scenario of, gee, what if my life was without this person day to day? And then it turns out that, gee, after 6 weeks, I'm actually okay. I met some other people on the trail and I'm actually not feeling, like it would be a disaster. Okay. Or maybe we feel like it is a disaster. And when we come home, we're like, no, I'm going to make my life here. So I have just enough time to tell this story. There's a story I tell about this that I've told with therapy clients, and I think you've heard the story. And it's what I call a golden silver. And so what we seek, we seek a gold medal. Okay, that's what everybody seeks. If they go to the Olympic Games, they want to win gold. If they could win gold, maybe they're just going to participate and they know they couldn't win gold. But if they think they can win gold, they are going there to win gold. And that's what a romantic love affair is it's the gold medal. It's that has to be the best of what is possible to human life. And something very much akin to that is having kids that you love. So all of that is potentially an integrated system these are the great possibilities and resources of great biological success for humans. And so we are aware that it's possible. We can see that in other people and we can feel the potential in ourselves that this would be possible. However, it can be hard to find it. And if we do find a great love affair, it can also be true that it can fade. And that's because of the nature of our biology and our psychology. This is absolutely it's just like, John Montana was the most beloved quarterback in San Francisco 49er history. But there came a day when management decided we got to let him go. We're going to go with the new guy. We're going to go with Steve Young. Okay. That was an excruciating decision for that organization. And it might not have been the right decision, but that was the decision that they made. In other words, it was inconceivable 4 years earlier, but times change. In fact, one thing that we know about life is that things will change. We just don't know how and we don't know when, but they absolutely will change. So a wonderful love affair changes, and it changes in its character. And so sexual chemistry may fade completely. One person may be completely uninterested in the other person, or both. That could happen that way, but they could still absolutely love each other outside of that dynamic tremendously. Now, what do you do? And the answer is, well, if you're 27, I'm telling you, you move on. Okay. If you're 67, you've got an interesting question in front of you. If you're 47, it's more puzzling still, and an interesting one of great individual genetic neural circuitry individuation. And the story that I've told to people in therapy is what I call the story of gold and silver. And that is, there was in 1984, the Olympic Games were in Los Angeles, and I lived there. And so my dad, as people may have heard, was a big judo person. And my dad was super judo enthusiast and made my sister and I do it, even though we didn't like it. My mom was all happy to watch us go so that she could, watch the big valley, without having my dad say, "What the hell is that?" On TV. So anyway, so we knew a lot about it. So we're connoisseurs, not great connoisseurs, but we're knowledgeable people, like a real knowledgeable basketball fan. And so, and my dad was a black belt and a sensei, so he taught us all kinds of stuff, and he taught us more than he taught the other kids, and just as you'd expect. And so he took us to the Olympic Games. I think it was like at Cal State Northridge or something in Los Angeles. It was the final. It was the day of the finals, and there was a man that the whole world knew about in judo. His name was Yamashita, and Yamashita is considered by many to be the greatest judoka who ever lived. He was a Japanese heavyweight. He wasn't that big. He was about 275 pounds, about 6'1". You might think that that's a monster, but they get bigger than that. These you can be looking at a guy that's 340 out there. So this is open division. So and so Yamashita was an undefeated heavyweight champion. He had never been beaten on the mat, and he had his international career was maybe 7 years old. So in 7 years, this guy had never been beaten. Pan Am Games, all Tokyo, all Asia, didn't make any difference. He beat everybody, and incredibly, he beat them almost all by ippon, which is not common. In other words, ippon is they tapped out. This was not a decision. This was the referees didn't have to decide. There wasn't points being scored. No, he freaking beat them, and it's done. Yamashita had about 170 matches, and he had won like 160 by ippon. It was insane. It was like an unbelievable record. It was like Michael Jordan winning 10 titles in a row. It just like never being beaten. Okay. Which is weird. It's like, how is it that you win your first match and you win your second and you win your third? You're just a kid. It's like 19 years old out there with grown men. No, he won every single match. So we walk into the gym. There's 10,000 people there, and they're all Japanese. Okay, it's like every Japanese in Los Angeles was, on the West Coast was in that gym, and they were all there to see Yamashita. And so we're watching all these other matches. It's all exciting. Guys are fighting for medals from all over the world. It's hell of judo. Almost didn't recognize the judo that I knew. It was so advanced and ruthless. And so it's the final groups now, because a bunch of other guys have been eliminated on previous days. And so we're looking at, the end. And Yamashita is in the final group, and there's like, I don't know, 16 guys left. And so I don't remember just exactly how this went, but I believe it was in the quarterfinals, Yamashita gets injured. And so you're watching this guy. They take a break. He's allowed a medical break. He comes back. He's limping, and miraculous. You're thinking, how the hell can you do this? What a shame. Okay. And he pulls this guy down on the mat and freaking pins him anyway. You're like, can't even believe it. This reminds us, if you're a basketball fan, of the flu game, Michael Jordan, one of the most famous games in history. Michael's got the flu in the NBA Finals, and he goes out there and scores 35 in the first half, and it's insane. Okay, so this is like the flu game, and the whole gym knows it, and everybody's like, how the hell is this guy going to get through? He's got a semifinal and a final. He's got a semifinal match. So semifinal match, miraculously, he does the same thing and beats that guy. Okay. On the other end of the draw, who has clearly been beating everybody, so he's the second big kahuna, is a man from Egypt. And unfortunately, I don't remember his name today. I think his name was Muhammad something. And so he is a big guy. We're looking at this guy and we're like, uh-oh, Yamashita's in trouble. This guy's a monster. Okay, he is easily beating his competition. And we're looking at this and we've got a gold medal final. And when Yamashita came out, because he'd go back to the locker room and God knows what they're doing to him back there that's legal. And he comes out to that final and this guy can barely walk. And you're thinking, this is impossible. There's no way this big Egyptian is going to get beaten. This guy's creaming everybody. This is the match. And on two good legs, this would be a hell of a fight. Okay. And then something interesting happens. And the big Egyptian will not attack that foot. So this match goes on, and you're like, Yamashita is doing his best. You can see that the big Egyptian, Muhammad, could beat him. Like, he could beat him. But he's trying to figure out how to beat him with finesse rather than to just force him onto a leg and beat him. He won't do it. And it's an amazing thing to watch. This is not just any match. This isn't at the Pan Am Games. This is the Olympic gold medal final. Neither of these men will ever be here again. They're not going to come back for a second Olympics. You only peak, athletically in your life once. And so you're like, this goes on, and deep into the match, Yamashita manages to get this guy on the ground, and there is no man in the world like Yamashita, and Yamashita beat Muhammad on the ground. It was incredible. The place just exploded. Couldn't believe it. And at the medal ceremony, these big guys hug, and then you see at the medal ceremony, Yamashita, and you can tell it very heartfelt, raises this guy's arm. He knew what had happened. 30 years goes by, and I had always had that day in the back of my head. I thought, that was an extraordinary event. And what happened was, in about like 30 years later, I think 2014, on the 30th anniversary of this, the Emperor of Japan sends an emissary to Egypt with the Order of the Rising Sun to give to Muhammad. Okay. Muhammad at that point, I'm calling him Muhammad because I'm pretty sure that's his name, but I might be wrong, and I apologize if I'm misremembering. That this guy had become a famous and deeply respected international referee. After that match, there was caucuses about this, about what he did. And it ushered in a whole new thinking about how sportsmanship needs to be played out in judo. This is the gold and silver. This guy won the silver medal. Okay. It isn't what he wanted. He came to win gold. He was ready to win, and he was going to give it his all to win it. Okay. But he couldn't. He couldn't figure out how to do it. And he couldn't figure out how to do it in the right way, the best way for everybody concerned. It didn't make sense to him. So he did it the very best way that he had. And in the end, he has a silver medal. And it's not just a silver medal, it's golden. It was the finest thing that he could have possibly done with his life. Okay. That's what some of these great relationships are. You can have a great friendship, a great marriage. It no longer is golden. Okay. It isn't exactly what we want. It's what we got. And it's fantastic. And not only that, I don't believe that judoka would want to trade his silver medal for gold. Okay. So that's how I look at that. And each individual that's in those circumstances has to, you try to look around the edges. You try to find a way to win the gold. You try to figure out whether or not this is possible. That's all you can do. Okay. In the end, you may stay exactly where you are in the situation that you're in, having been under some very hard conflict about whether or not you were going to go and get what you wanted for yourself, but it wouldn't have been the right thing to do. So, this is where consultation with different kinds of people from different kinds of perspectives. Dr. Jen Hawk is, for example, highly imaginative and thoughtful about these kinds of conflicts in relationships. And because she's Jen, she's far more open-minded than my mind usually goes about agreements that people can have about open marriages and so forth. And my grandfather was a Methodist minister, so my brain naturally shrinks away. But the open women that have been close and important to me in my life, like Jen and Melissa dragged me to a nudist place. You know what I mean? I never would have gone there in 1,000 years, and yet I learned important things from having gone there. So if you are in a situation like this, I would talk to a few people that may have wisdom or insight into how to move your mind around as you look at this problem. But the problem that you are staring at is you are staring at the problem of the gold and silver. And it's one of the harder problems that human beings ever face. It's a tough problem, but it's also a problem with beauty in it. And so, there is so that's what I have to say to this very heartfelt and well described and loving human who finds himself in a tough bind. You're in one, and these are the kinds of ideas that I bring to it.
That's it for this episode. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Please make sure to click like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us out a lot for the YouTube channel and the algorithm. If you have a question or a situation that you'd like asked or analyzed, you can send it in through beatyourgenes.org, or you can email me directly at beatyourgenes@gmail.com, and I'm happy to put your question into the queue. If you're a new subscriber to our YouTube channel and perhaps like what you hear and want to listen to some older episodes, you can hear them on any major podcasting platform or app like iTunes or Spotify or Libsyn or others, or you can look at different episodes if you go to www.beatyourgenes.org. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time.